Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about the muscles that are involved in the squat, and people can understand which muscles grow from it, which are the primary movers, which are the important stabilizers. And I'm going to draw from this a lot of anecdote from the strength world to some extent, but we're also going to talk about the scientific evidence. And what people do need to keep in mind, we do not have a lot of data on power squats. So when I make some of these statements, people assume that we're talking about power squats, but the reality is we're talking about Olympic style squats, or what most of you call a high bar squat or a full squat, because we have actual legitimate hypertrophy data on this. We have tons of EMG data, so we know which muscles grow at what rates on just a normal back squat. And it's funny because the data that we have sounds like to people who believe that the high bar squat is some amazing quad exercise and quad dominant and everything. They think that we're talking about power squats whenever we talk about this, but we're actually talking about the Olympic squat because it's still mainly about hips and glutes. Again, people say, oh, it's for the style you're doing in these videos. Well, no, this is actually for the Olympic style. Shoulder width, ass to grass. And if you look at the data that we have and the muscles that grow from it, what we find is that the glutes and adductors hypertrophy more. They hypertrophy more than the quads do. Now, when you make a statement like that, people say, oh, so you're saying the quads don't grow. No, they do. They're one of the primary movers. They're the third most important primary mover. They're incidentally also the biggest muscle in the body. Right? Quadriceps are the largest muscle in the body. Glutes are a pretty close second. Right? Glutes are a pretty close second. But when you start looking at a lot of that data, what we find is that that's the rate that it grows at. Glutes and adductors seem to grow the most, and I forget which one grew slightly more, but they were statistically insignificant, with quads being the third. Right? Start looking at muscle activation data. We actually find that this is true for high bar, low bar, safety bar, front squat. We actually get similar data. Right? There's no reason to actually think that any of these are particularly quad dominant. But again, when you say that, it sounds like, oh, the quads don't matter. But that's not what's being said. In other words, your quads are going to grow less than these other muscles, just slightly. They also contribute less. They contribute less. Not saying they don't contribute, but meaning there's probably not a reason to focus on them greatly if your goal is to have a big squat. And this is the one reason why people will see powerlifters' legs from the front and they'll say, oh, they've got smaller legs than bodybuilders. How are they so much stronger? Well, we don't. In fact, I have pretty big quads. But it's because we're more adductor and glute and hamstring and all of that. Whereas in a lot of bodybuilders, we'll put more focus in their quads. And that's fine for their purposes. Fine for their purposes. Incidentally, bodybuilders tend to have the biggest quads. Not to say that power lifters and Olympic lifters and stuff don't have big quads. They're just not quite as big usually because they put more focus on it. So when we're talking about squatting, the muscles that impact how much weight you can move are going to be glutes, adductors, quads. We also know this is how good of an exercise squatting is. If you guys look at the hip thrust study that was done, the hypertrophy study, what did we find? Glutes grow more from full squats than they do from hip thrusts when plotted over time. I believe it was like a 12-week long study with trained lifters. If I recall, everyone had at least 2 years of training experience and they all had decent squats. Right? They were not noob squatters. Yet what did we find? Squat caused more glute growth. It's a glute exercise. And my or your opinion on that doesn't matter. This is what's been looked at in the research. So then we come to Well, why do we have all these other muscles we care about in the squat? Well, that's a good question. I'm glad you asked. They're all important stabilizers. And when I say stabilizers, we mean they help you maintain a better bar path. And what will we think of? Well, primarily hamstrings and erectors. That includes the low back. So what do? Well, hamstrings, if you're going to power squat, hamstrings stabilize your ability to control the eccentric to sit back into a true power squat. Very important. Pretty important stuff. All right? Particularly if you want to get the most out of your adductors. Critical. Hamstrings grow almost zero from the squat. Here's what they found. Even in novice lifters, when they look at hypertrophy, hamstrings grow the least out of any muscle in the lower body from squats. Not saying it's zero, but it's nearly zero. In other words, a good morning, a deadlift, an RDL will put 10 times as much hamstring on you as a squat will. So even as a stabilizer, they're important enough that they'll get a small amount of training response. But if you're already doing other movements, it's not going to make any difference, right? If you're already doing hamstring work, you're not going to see a real difference. If you're only doing squats, it will, but you're also going to get imbalanced very quickly. What about low back? Well, low back helps you maintain your thoracic position. Helps you keep the bar mid-foot too, right? And that's true of any squat style. Back on the EMG, high bar squatting put, I believe, more stress on the low back. But when you also think about it, though, for true power squatting, low back is going to be critical. It keeps you from dumping the bar forward when it gets really heavy coming out of the hole, right? It's coming out of the bottom where it matters. Allows you to maintain position. What else? Upper back. Upper back's not a stabilizer in the same sense. Okay, it's not quite the same. It can help, again, because of the thoracic erectors themselves. But when we start thinking of upper back, about traps, rhomboids, all that stuff, why does that matter? It lets you have the bar sit further back. You have more meat for the bar to sit on, and it displaces it further back. What does that do to our center of gravity? You could push it back another inch, a couple centimeters, depending on whether you use freedom units or not. All right? Pushes it back. So you start looking at those three things together. What do they give us? The ability to maintain the most favorable bar path to get the most out of the lift, particularly get the most out of something like the adductors. Right? This is why it matters. And they are important for these roles. They're important for it. I mean, if you're big enough and strong enough, you may not need them as much because you can just muscle your way through a bad bar path. But they do matter. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.